An appendix by way of reflection upon Captaine Robert Everard's epistle, and account of his conversion and submission to the Romish Church, and Mr. Cressy's Exomologesis. Since the finishing of the foregoing treatise, I was told of an epistolary discourse of Captaine Everard's, and withal that the substance of it was fully answered by what I had there discussed, only it was convenient to accommodate the passages relating thereto to the several parts of his epistle. Upon this suggestion I procured the epistle itself as enlarged in the second edition, and diligently read it once or twice over. And I confess I was at first dubious whether I should take any notice of it, partly because I saw it was nothing but a collection out of others, as he most properly calls it, and a repetition of those old sophisms that have been answered and exploded 100 times over, and partly because I discerned by the spirit of the man, and the frame of his discourse, and the circumstances of his charge, that there was no likelihood at all of retrieving and reclaiming him, how clear and irresistible soever the evidence and arguments were that should be produced. He that hath but half an eye may see a design in the whole management of the change. And although he assures us with a teste me ipso that he is not biased by worldly interests and private ends, he must allow discreet persons the liberty of their faith in that particular, and not take it amiss if, seeing the feebleness of his arguments, and their insufficiency for the producing of such a change, they suspect it was done by the power of interest, which is so secret an affair, and its methods so cryptical, and the ways of serving it so various, that no wise man will believe it impossible. And I am sure the contexture of his discourse and the manner of his process doth not render it at all incredible. And these considerations incline me to silence. But on the other side, when I considered that the hand of Joab sufficiently appears in the penning of this epistle, that it was a collection of the strength of more learned writers, and a conjunction of abler heads than his own, who were resolved in this occasion and instance to represent what could in brief be said to persuade unsettled persons to change their religion, and whatever other men's opinions are, what a reverend esteem the author hath of it, who tells us he saw reason enough to believe it could not be answered, page 88, and that he challengeth it as a piece of justice to show him his errors. I thought it not amiss to take some notice of it, knowing that if what I should say were unsuccessful to him, yet it would not be unacceptable to God, since we are a sweet savour of God in them that believe and in them that perish. And that if I were not an instrument of God's mercy to him, in reducing him to the truth from which he hath revolted, yet I should be an instrument of God's justice, and a witness on God's behalf, to leave him without excuse. In one thing I must crave Mr. Everard's pardon, if I do not take his counsel in answering him kata podas, and setting down each of his paragraphs before the several answers. It is a course which I confess I do not approve of in the answering of other authors, because it runs a man into personal contests, and petite animadversions, and catching as little advantages, and so expends the answerer's pains, and the reader's patience, and the buyer's money, to no purpose. And if I did like it in some others, yet really he must excuse me, if I do not esteem him so classical an author, nor his epistle so weighty a discourse, as to deserve such solemn consideration. Yet this I shall promise him, and I call God to witness it, that I shall not wilfully decline any part of it, wherein his strength may lie, but shall endeavor to the utmost of my poor skill to single out such things as are most plausible and considerable, and such as if they be solidly answered, the rest will fall of course, or need no further trouble. What I have to say I shall reduce to 2 heads. Number 1, personal, and number 2, dogmatical. The first I shall pass over in few words, because it concerns not the merits of the cause, yet it is not convenient wholly to neglect it, because it is set forth mata polanges fan thesis. And Mr. Everard, whom I would by no means deprive of his due praise, hath showed wit and art in it. Something therefore must be said to disabuse such as are too apt to be deceived with good words and fair speeches, and the influence of examples. And if there be some seeming harshness in my expressions, it must not be ascribed to my temper, which my friends will assoil me from, or principles or hatred of Mr. Everard, a person known to me nec beneficio nec injurio, but to the discharge of my duty, which is to rebuke such as he is de patomios, sharply, and the necessary caution of others. My personal reflections shall only be two: the first upon the quality of the person, the second the occasion and manner of the charge. First, as for the quality of the person, I must confess I am not surprised at all with the apostasy, for so I must call it with St. Paul, 1 Timothy 4 verse 1 and 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 3, of a person of his character. We have, as we have it drawn by his own pen in page 4. When I professed myself against infant baptism, I had run through almost, if not altogether, all the several professions of Christianity then appearing in this kingdom. It is no new thing that a giddy-headed man should get a fall. It is no more than was long since foretold, and this day, in this person, those scriptures are fulfilled, which tell us that the unlearned and unstable, should wrest the Scriptures, as this epistle most horribly doth, to their own destruction. 2 Peter 3, verse 16. That such as receive not the truth in the love of it should be given up to strong delusions, to believe lies. 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 10 and 11. That such as were ever learning, and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth, should be led away, 2 Timothy 3, verses 6 and 7, that evil men and seducers, as he now acknowledgeth he was, should wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived, verse 13, that unstable souls should be beguiled, 2 Peter 2, verse 13. It is not at all strange that he despised the persons, vilified the function, condemned and forsook the guidance of able and faithful Protestant ministers, by whom he might have been easily antidoted against this infection. Should be betrayed into the hands of Romish priests, it is not strange that he that loved to wander should antiquum obtinere, and having passed through all the varieties which England affords, should gratify his temper and follow his inclinations to see what news at Rome. In the meantime, it concerns all Protestants, and especially persons of the same complexion and condition, with fear and reverence to behold the just and tremendous judgment of God upon unsettled and unstable Christians, and such as are given to change, whilst they see these smaller rivulets of lesser error leading to the Dead Sea of damnable delusions. And as we have many woeful instances of poor deluded souls, that, having wandered from party to party, from opinion to opinion, from congregation to congregation, have at last been swallowed up, some in the gulf of downright atheism, others of the besotting dotages of the Quakers. So we have here an instance of one whom the same wildness and wantonness of opinion hath betrayed to popish impostures. The second personal reflection concerns the occasion and manner of his change, which in brief is this, as himself represents it in pages 5 and 6. He falls into the company and acquaintance of a lay papist, which he had been always told, and supposed that they were an ignorant generation. And he proposeth and presseth an argument which the captain could not answer, and therefore submits and borrows 2 or 3 popish books from that gentleman. That is, the question of questions, fiat lux, and Knott's answer to Chillingsworth. And so the work is done. My captain is conquered, and become a papist, or stylo novo, a Roman Catholic. Upon this relation, I shall take the boldness to make these following animadversions. Number 1. In general, it is very observable how easily he gives up the cause. How valiantly the captain fought in the field, I know not, but sure I am, if he fought at the same rate that here he disputes, no man could desire an easier adversary. Happily, because he was about to commence into a belief of the unbloody sacrifice of the Mass, he was resolved his antagonists should not have a bloody victory. I shall adventure to commend this pattern as an effectual receipt to make papists, and that ye may see it is a palux ensign, if not a pas thumacon. It will indifferently serve to make Turks, Jews, pagans, or heretics of any kind. Let a person unlearned or unstudied in the point he debates, such as none that read this relation will deny this author to have been, unless they be such themselves, enter the lists with some able champion of the adversary party, a character which the captain himself ascribes to his then antagonist. And when he meets with an objection that himself cannot answer, let him conclude it unanswerable, which our author did, and read 2 or 3 such books as his adversary shall put into his hand. If this do not speedily and effectually work the cure, he may be given over for desperate. Number 2. Though to determine that this supposed conversion was a plotted business may seem an intrusion into the divine prerogative to judge the heart, yet this I may safely say, that it looks so like a plot that it requires more than an ordinary charity to believe it was not. For as the philosopher well observes, no man must, and no serious man will, forsake a solid and well-grounded truth for some subtle objection suggested by a crafty disputer which he cannot answer. If it was not a designed thing, how can it be imagined that in a matter of salvation and damnation he should be so grossly negligent in the use of means to come to the knowledge of the truth and the answering of his objection? Otherwise, who can believe that he would not have addressed himself to some able Protestant minister or scholar to see whether he could answer it? Unless, peradventure, through the pride of his heart, he scorned the advice of ministers, and thought himself wiser than all his teachers, and then no wonder such pride had a fall. Or would he not, by the direction of some knowing Protestant, have rather searched into some Protestant books for an answer, as here he falls upon the reading of popish authors by the advice of a papist, if he really were a Protestant at that time when he pretended to be so? For if this captain had understood those controversies, and spent that time in the reading of the solid books of excellent Protestant authors, and grounding himself in the principles of religion, which he spent in talking and teaching others, and scribbling of idle pamphlets, and railing at learned and godly ministers, these objections which, through his ignorance and unacquaintedness with those points, seem new to him, would have been discovered to him, as they are to others, to be but culverts, not twice, but 20 times sod, and arguments long since exploded.